Live NFL trivia every Tuesday night on Twitch at 9 p.m. Eastern. Come show off your football knowledge and have a chance to win cash prizes. Check the link in the description to find out more. And now, on with our feature presentation. I'm going to give you a hypothetical scenario. Suppose the Jaguars draft Trevor Lawrence, as everyone expects them to do. However, the contract negotiations aren't going too smoothly. Lawrence wants way more money than what the Jaguars are willing to offer him. We get a few months into the process and we get toward training camp, and the two sides are still miles apart. Now imagine that instead of continuing to negotiate or holding out and threatening to sit out and re-enter the draft, Lawrence called up the Chicago Bears and asked them how much they'd pay him and threatened to sign with the Bears, even though the Bears didn't have their rights at all. There's many reasons something like this couldn't happen, with the main one being that, well, it's not allowed. You can't just send a text in the middle of the night to a team asking them if they're up and try and negotiate a contract with them while another team still owns your rights. It goes against every rule in the book. So if some crazy hypothetical like this seems hysterically impossible, why do I bring it up? Because a player actually tried that once. After the 1969 NFL-AFL draft, one player tried to negotiate a contract with a completely different team than the one that drafted him. And this is the crazy story behind that. Before I talk about the player and the controversy in question, we need some context as to the team involved, and why they were looking at this player in particular. Our story involves the Boston Patriots. In 1968, the Patriots were terrible. They finished this season at 4-10, and after starting 3-3 and looking somewhat respectable, they dropped 7 of their final 8 games to close the season. The 10 losses was tied for the most they'd ever had in a season up until that point. And while there were many factors for the demise of the Pats, including a defense that allowed 40-plus points in 4 games, a defense that allowed a league-worst 406 points for an average of 29 per game, and a running game that ranked dead last in yards, touchdowns, and yards per carry, the passing game wasn't helping things either. You could make a legitimate argument that the Pats had the worst receiving unit in the AFL during that 1968 season. The only guy of note was All-Pro tight end Jim Whalen. From the standpoint of strictly wide receivers, ends, and flankers, it was atrocious. Aaron Marsh was the leading receiver on the team. He had 19 receptions for 331 yards. That's it. Besides Marsh, the only other player to score multiple touchdowns was Gino Cappelletti, who was going to be 35 years old in 1969 and was showing noticeable signs of decline. He was playing at a level in 1968 that was a far cry from his All-Pro days as one of the best receivers in AFL history. Of the 3 receivers on the Patriots to finish with over 200 yards receiving, 2 of them would never play again after that 1968 season, with Bill Murphy and Art Graham being done. The Patriots needed a wide receiver badly, and with that, they were eyeing Florida State wideout Ron Sellers. Regarded by many as the best receiver in the class, the All-American had a dominant 1968 season, where he had 86 receptions for 1,496 yards and 12 touchdowns with the Seminoles in 10 games. Remember, this was in 1968. Those numbers would be impressive today, but in 1968, they were on another level. He led the NCAA in receptions and receiving yards that season, and led the NCAA in receiving yards in 1967 as well. With the Patriots needing a wide receiver, and with Sellers still being on the board when the 6th pick in the draft rolled around, the Patriots chose the Florida State man. Now all the Pats had to do was sign him. And that, as they would soon find out, was going to be a hysterical saga. That offseason, the Patriots hired Jets offensive coordinator Cleve Rush as their new head coach. Seemed like a smart hire on paper, as he led the offense that just won the Super Bowl and became the first team in AFL history to ever win the Big 8. He nearly died at his introductory press conference after getting shocked by some faulty electronic equipment. I made a video about that a while ago, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But I bring that up because that was an omen to just about everything that was about to happen with the Patriots, including this negotiation period with Sellers. Sellers was looking for a lot. He was looking for $250,000 over a 3-year period. He wanted a ton of bonuses and incentives, and he wanted a no-cut contract, meaning that the Patriots could not cut him for at least 3 years. You might be wondering why a clause like that would even be necessary for a first-round pick, but when he realized that New England's first-round pick from 1968, defensive end Dennis Byrd, was cut after just 1 season, it made a bit more sense. However, the Patriots were not budging. They weren't offering bonuses or the cut clause, and were offering about half of what Sellers was looking for. Bill Bassford, who was Sellers' lawyer, said that if the Patriots were to put everything they're offering into one package, bonus, salary, and incentive clauses, it would not come to $150,000 for 3 years. Remember that back then, the draft was held in January. By this point, it was July, and the two sides were miles apart. Negotiations were going absolutely nowhere. Most people would try one of two things to create a sense of urgency and try and establish leverage. Number one, say that you're going to hold out and re-enter the draft the following year. Number two, start negotiating with the team in the CFL and threaten to play in Canada, completely spurning the NFL. Heck, 2 years later, we saw Greg Martin try that move, and you can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But sellers decided for a third option. It was an option that was so outlandish and so ridiculous that you have to wonder what his camp was thinking. Because in the middle of July, when the negotiations were at a standstill, he called up the Oakland Raiders and tried to negotiate a contract with Oakland. Seriously. How ridiculous was this entire idea? You know, it's always a good sign when Bassford himself said, "It's just a shot in the dark because I don't really know whether or not such a thing is permitted." It's a desperation move. Why on earth you would say the quiet part out loud, I don't know. But basically, Bassford admitted to doing something that's not even the slightest bit permitted. Safe to say, head coach Cleve Rush was ticked off by this. He called the whole situation ridiculous, saying that he had never heard of lawyers being able to make a trade for their clients. He then added that he knew nothing would come of this move, because if the Raiders picked up the phone, they would be guilty of tampering, and I'm sure they won't do it. They know the rules. Just like Rush predicted, the Raiders never answer the phone. The Raiders never made any contact with sellers. This was a Hail Mary attempt before that was even a thing, and it backfired in spectacular and hilarious fashion. Eventually, Sellers would sign with the Patriots a month later. While he got his 3-year deal, it was for $120,000, which was still well above the league average, but was half of what he was looking for. The bonuses and cut clauses were rejected. They got the deal done, but Bassford's bluff definitely didn't help his client. However, after 8 months of drama, the saga was finally over, and Ron Sellers was officially a Boston Patriot. How did his pro football career turn out? Well, it's complicated. On one hand, he immediately became the best receiver on the Patriots. That was one of the top receivers in the AFL and one of the top deep threats as a rookie. He finished that 1969 season with 6 touchdowns, 705 yards, and a Pro Bowl appearance, becoming the first Patriot since 1964 and just the second Patriot ever at the time to make the All-Star game as a rookie. On the other hand, he didn't do a whole lot after that, playing just 3 seasons with the Pats and finishing his career in New England with 79 receptions for 1,477 yards and 13 touchdowns. Especially since 4-time Pro Bowl wide receiver Gene Washington went later in the first round, I'm sure the Pats were expecting a lot more out of Sellers than what they got. Still, at least they were able to sign him after the insane drama from the draft. If any draftees are watching this, a word of advice. If you're not progressing your contract negotiations with the club that drafted you, don't try and call up another team and start negotiating a contract with them. Because that's not allowed. They're not going to pick up the phone and talk with you, and it's just going to make you look really stupid at the end of the day. Be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot, and be sure to check out Twitch every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JRGator9 and subscribe to 60-Second NFL History on YouTube. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters who help with the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. So you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.